Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of The Suited Shootist. And what I want to talk about today is something that it's kind of timely because Tamara Keel just made mention of this on her Facebook, and I had shared that post. And then I just also recently wrapped up a brief interview that I did with Caleb Giddings over at GAT Daily for Gun Day Brunch, talking about the same thing. And what I'm talking about today is how fixated we can get on the on-paper performance of our concealed carry gear. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about something like a flashlight or if we're talking about something like a firearm. Invariably, people will, as soon as the new hotness drops, they'll rush out and they'll pick it up because it's giving them that much more performance. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying, I don't care how you spend your money. My goal, one of the major purposes of this channel, is to make sure that people spend their money intentionally and that they get the maximum ROI for it. It's true when it comes to wardrobe development. It's true when it comes to gear considerations. So with that kind of precursor disclaimer out of the way, the comment that I made was that people tend to get so hung up on the stats of their gear that it no longer becomes about practical performance and now has everything to do with basically they're playing like a tabletop role-playing game. I've never personally played Dungeons & Dragons, so I can't speak to it, but my understanding is that you have a fixed number of points that you can disperse amongst various attributes of your character: strength, agility, stealth, etc. And what happens is that if you get so hung up on the on-paper performance of your gear, two things. Number one, just because the stats are better doesn't mean that your performance is any better. But the nice thing is there are enough shooting drills out there to be able to quantify how much better you arguably are with piece of equipment X versus piece of equipment Y. Now, when you're talking generally about, say, a big gun versus a small gun, that delta tends to be anywhere between 5 and 10% depending on the shooter. But here's the thing. Arguably the most relevant metrics are the ones that aren't as quantifiable. You know, how easy is this gear to actually conceal and live with to the point where you will carry it with you all of the time, and the probability or likelihood that it will end up getting exposed or somehow or other give you away to the point that it results in additional social friction is approaching zero as much as possible. So, examples. This is my Boresight Glock 19. This is, without a doubt, my optimal handgun. It is the one that I've spent the most money on. It is the one that I shoot the most accurately and the fastest. Most recently, it's the one that I shot the 91% on the super test and the dark pin standards with. And because it is the biggest gun, it is arguably the easiest to shoot because there's more to hold on to, so easier to manage recoil, etc., etc., etc. It is the most challenging of the guns I have to conceal. Now, with the advent of the Filster Enigma, this went from an 80% solution to probably about a 90% solution for me. Especially just sort of day to day, I can conceal this reasonably effectively. But it's still relatively large. And it's, when fully loaded, it's heavy enough that you know that it's there. So that's where some of the other guns come into the equation. If I need something that is a bit more discreet or a bit more unobtrusive, something like this Ruger LCR22 comes into play for a few different reasons. Number one, it's dramatically lighter, it's dramatically smaller, and the rounded profile of it is such that when I carry this, it's basically undetectable outside of either being wanded with a metal detector or a physical pat down. And it's considerably easier to achieve that result with this than it is with this. Another factor, and honestly for this, it's the main driver of why I choose to carry the LCR in certain equations, is there is not a single sharp edge or corner on this thing. And so it is much more forgiving to my clothing. And, you know, when I'm talking about wearing a jacket that would cost me $1,500 to replace, or, you know, a pair of pants that would be $500 to replace, my wardrobe longevity factors in, because, you know, people are going to say, oh, well, you know, if you get into a fight, then that clothing is, you know, shot to hell anyways. And that's true. But I don't want to be putting any unnecessary wear on my clothing if I can avoid it. So the wardrobe preservation is something that I factor in. Not all my clothing is disposable. That's for me. It may not be the case for you. But the other part of it is that for people for whom this is not a lifestyle, for the people that are not hobbyists, who don't routinely seek out continuing firearms training for both personal development and recreational regions, smaller guns that are more easily assimilated into their existing lifestyle make a lot more sense, because it kind of goes back to my whole issue with the idea of dressing around the gun. Let's think about this. You know, when you're looking at gun culture 2.0 and kind of the burgeoning gun culture 3.0, these are people that are, for the most part, relatively established as adults. So they're, you know, let's say they're late 20s to early 30s. And if you're talking about having kind of a good sense of, you know, world outlook, starting, to make the math easy, let's call it 15, 16-ish. I mean, we were all idiots as teenagers and thought we knew everything, but just for the sake of argument, you know, at that point, you kind of have a sense of what's going on. If somebody has made it 10 to 20 years of their adult-ish life without something like this being a factor, then all of a sudden saying, hey, this now has to become the center of your universe, and every lifestyle choice and every decision that you make from here on out is going to be dictated by this thing. That's a hard sell. It's a really hard sell. And Chris Seipert of Citizens Defense Research is fond of saying, you know, one of the things you can count on is human laziness. And for the most part, if somebody has a decade or more of life experience that has not necessitated something like this up to this point, they are going to come to a conclusion. I was like, well, I haven't needed it so far, so the odds of me needing it in the future, you know, are probably similar. And, you know, we can spout statistics and all this other shit as much as possible, but there is no way that you are going to overcome somebody's beliefs with fact and logic. And if you're asking someone to overhaul their entire lifestyle to accommodate something like this they haven't needed yet, making something that is a lot easier to fold in to their existing lifestyle and is a lot more user-friendly is a good way to get more people on board as actual practicing concealed carriers. The reason why this is important is several-fold. Number one, you know, Paul Sharp is fond of saying, you know, one of his main goals is making more dangerous good people. If we have a higher percentage of the armed populace, it helps contribute to that higher percentage of armed good people. Secondarily, the more people that we can get acclimated to an armed lifestyle, whether it's with a pocket 380, something like this, or a full-size duty gun, then those are more people that we have in our camp that can then help combat both the public opinion attacks and the political attacks on our rights and our lifestyle. So it helps create more allies. And the other part is that when we have more folks that don't fit into the caricature of the stereotypical gun owner, it makes the whole thing a lot more accessible and more challenging to effectively vilify. And so the other part of this that I really kind of find troubling is that now, yeah, you've got Chuck Pressburg is famous as saying that every gunfight is open division, and that's absolutely true. And if your lifestyle is such that accommodating something like this on a daily basis is really super easy, go on and do it, by all means. But just understand that that's not the case for everybody. And so are you really that much better with the Wonder Blaster 9000 versus the Wonder Blaster 8000 that you had a year and a half ago? Could that money be better allocated in either more ammunition and training or donations to your preferred Second Amendment activism group? So there's always different factors to this. And again, if this is what you do instead of golf on the weekends, then rock on with your bad self. But if we're talking expressly about the idea of somebody as a civilian defender who is going to do the bare minimum in order to kind of be part of this whole space, you can either tell them, hey, fuck you, I don't value you because you're not willing to put in the work, in which case, cool, we've just alienated a potential ally, and I'm not a huge fan of that. Or we can say, yes, something like this is optimal. But for practical purposes, something that is a little bit smaller, a little bit less obtrusive, is going to be a lot more accessible. And, the other part of it is that most of the people that I interact with, on Facebook and Instagram and in person, we are that beyond the 1% that Carl Wren talks about. We are the minority of the gun world in that we allocate a lot of our time and effort to improving our skill set. There is a higher probability that a high-level technical shooter, I'll use Caleb Giddings again as an example, will be able to shoot a bore sight Glock 19 with a red dot better than a stock Glock 19. But that's also part and parcel with his high degree of skill. Mario Andretti can get better performance out of a Miata than I can out of a Formula One car. So you got to figure out where that point of diminishing returns is for people. And just don't get so hung up on the on-paper stats that you lose sight of the functional, practical performance of everything. And so I'm very curious how you strike that balance. Are you in the fortunate enough position that your lifestyle allows you to just carry whatever you want with minimal consequence? If so, that's awesome. I'm very interested to hear if you are not that fortunate and your either professional or social requirements are such that you have to make compromise. How do you do that math and strike that balance? I want to hear about that down in the comments because that is what's going to help a lot of people. So let me know what you think on that. And outside of that, I hope everybody has a fantastic week. Stay dangerous and stay sharp.